This same doctor retracted his position a short time later, but this was never reported. So the doctor said that there might be a link between homosexuality and genetic disposition. And this is where this position comes from, where people will say, well, he was born that way. He's born homosexual. To which your reply should be, do you know that the solitary doctor who advanced that position has retracted it? So now what are you going to lean on? Do you know that the very person that you depend on in the scientific journal that stated it only as a possibility, number one, and number two, retracted that statement? Are you aware of that? And as their eyes glaze over and they start to drool, you then come with a coup de grace, which is what I mentioned before, regarding what is a species and reproduction and other things and so on and so forth. Because it's important that we take a very forensic view of the homosexual issue. The world received a shock in 1409AH when the U.S.'s crime statistics were released by the UN for discussion by temporary and permanent council members. It seemed unbelievable that 2% of the world's population was the number one arms dealer in the world and responsible for more than 80% of the world's crime statistics. It's 2% of the world's population, consuming 60% of the world's natural resources, responsible for 80% of the world's crime statistics. What type of country are we talking about? It doesn't sound like we're talking about mentally set people, mentally sane people. It sounds like we're talking about a country that's just out of control. It's at war with itself. When you have artists releasing records like Ready to Die, Get My Gun, Rat-a-tat-tat. When you have used in common parlance the language of these people, I bombed on my exam. My mother's going to go ballistic. I feel sometimes like going postal on my brother. This violent, militaristic conquest language is used in no other country but the US and those that have copied it in its culture. Going ballistic, what's that a reference to? Ballistic missiles. Intercontinental ballistic missiles. He's going to go ballistic. Right? I bombed on my exam. Smoke mushroom, bombed. He's the bomb, meaning he's good looking. Right? Smoke mushroom cloud. Right? Having a discussion about someone and saying, well, if it has to be rat-a-tat-tat, then I suppose that's it. Meaning he's got to get gunned down. So-and-so needs to get smoked like a turkey. Meaning he needs to be shot close range. Right? Wet up. Shot with a semi-automatic weapon. Soaked. Shot at close range with a semi-automatic weapon. Right? Flyby. Where you drive by someone's house in neutral without stopping and you shoot up their window. Drive by, where you are going by in neutral but you brake long enough to shoot the house up. And walk by, when you decide to get out and get close to the victim. These are all things coming from that wicked, idolatrous, profligate society. And invading your home through that box flashing the blue gamma rays. You suspend your disbelief. And you take it in, and then you start speaking like the box, walking like the box, acting like the box, talking like the box, conversing like the box. In fact, you find that you can't speak to anyone without making a reference to the box. I'm at work, I can't speak to anyone. Why? Because they only speak one language, boxese, the language of the box. They don't know any other language. They've got to always make some reference to some television program or some slogan because their brain has been downloaded and removed. That is part of where the disease is coming from. And it's a serious thing. Serious thing. The Soviet Union pulled out of Afghanistan during this time after being defeated, which was at the same time the jihad activist Sheikh Abdullah Azzam was assassinated by members of Ayman Zawahiri's entourage that had come with him to Afghanistan in 1405 from Egypt. Please keep in mind that Sheikh Abdullah Azzam's position in defense of Muslim lands was that Muslims had the right to defend themselves but it was always known by Sheikh Abdul Azam, it was known by his son-in-law and others that he did not propose offensive jihad against other nations. Something totally at odds with Ayman al-Zawahiri. This situation regarding assassination was stated by the son-in-law of Abdullah Azam, Abdullah Anas. Azam's sons were spread throughout the world, and his grandsons, one of whom wound up in Compton, becoming a member of Mob Piru blood gang. So it shows what happens if we don't take care of the members of our ummah. They're gangbanging. Grandfather Sheikh Abdullah Azam is gangbanging. Doesn't matter. Why? Because the link between the grandfather and the grandsons is cut because the parents, they either didn't do what should have been done or failed to do what they were supposed to do. And so the grandsons of Sheikh Abdullah Azam are gangbangers. Mob Piru. What can you do? Ruhollah Khomeini called for the death of Salman Rushdie for writing his book, The Satanic Verses. Later that year, Khomeini would die from cancer at 88 years of age. The father of the Islamic Revolution of Iran was dead, but the state was still strong, even after an exhausting 8-year war with Iraq over border and ideological issues. Iraq during this time had taken a break from the genocide against its Kurdish population. Black Panther co-founder Huey P. Newton was killed in the Acorn Projects of Oakland. Huey P. Newton was the co-founder of the Black Panthers, which was a black self-help group founded by him and Bobby Seale, which was to try to redress some of the wrongs that were done by the U.S. government. But to destroy the Black Panthers' strength, they formed the COINTELPRO, which is the counterintelligence program, to circulate heroin into the black neighborhoods to destroy the black resistance to the U.S. government. They did it again in the 80s with crack. See, these things are circular. They're circular. Further to this, we see that in the year 1409AH, Sheikh Abdul Azam, as I mentioned, was murdered by a fringe of Jama'at al-Jihad that had come with Ayman al-Zawahiri to Afghanistan. Sheikh Ahmed Yassin had been released from prison only 1 year previously. He was the sheikh that was in the wheelchair. He had been released from prison only 1 year previously. And he was seen as the symbol of the Palestinian people, the spiritual mentor of what's called Hamas. Now, what is Hamas? Hamas is a collection of some 5 other jama'at. A collection of some 5 other jama'at. It's often referred to as Al-Harakat al-Islamiyya al-Muqawwama, the Islamic uprising group, which Hamas is just an abbreviation. Al-Harakat al-Islamiyya al-Muqawwama, the Islamic uprising movement. And some sections of Hamas have Salafi inclinations. Some have Shia inclinations and take money from Iran. And some are Orthodox, like Majma' al-Islami, the Islamic Congress. So they are a collection of some 5 or so other groups that basically agree on a charter that is about 34 pages long. But they are not one acting group that is monolithic, as is often presented by the press. It's not really like that at all. The Soviet Union, known the world over as the USSR, the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, collapsed under its own weight in the year 1410AH, with Germany later reunifying. The Gulf War also occurred after the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait and reannexation of the country into itself. The charge was on for Desert Storm, but they were made to stop short of Baghdad. So they actually received orders. Norman Schwarzkopf was on the way to Baghdad to topple Saddam and remove him. They received orders from Washington, leave him in. Split the country into 3 no-fly zones. Looking back on it with hindsight, we understand they were preparing for something bigger. If someone wanted to know whether or not Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, ask the US for their receipts on their weapon sales. You would have known straight away. They're the #1 arms dealers. Do they have nukes? I don't know. Ask the US. Ask them to open the cash register. Check their receipts. Let's look. No, they don't have them. They knew they didn't have them. So this is part of what was going on. It was a build-up to what later came that toppled Saddam. The Kurds would be massacred again when the U.S. would offer massive air support for their trying to topple Saddam. But then the U.S. changed its position. Saddam Hussein used mustard gas, botulinum toxin on Kurds, and horrible things that can't even be spoken of in this classroom without needing a bucket nearby, because it was wickedness what he did. Absolute wickedness. Saddam was one of the great tyrants. As I mentioned, he was a graduate. He should be a great tyrant because he's a graduate of Sandhurst. He's a graduate of Sandhurst. So was Augusto Pinochet, the South American tyrant. So was Muammar al-Qaddafi, the Libyan tyrant. So is Hosni Mubarak. So is Anwar Sadat. All these tyrants, interestingly enough, they've been to the British training schools that offer the best training for this type of stuff. There's a reason for that. Definitely a reason for it. To this day, mass graves are still found filled with the bodies of the descendants of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. 1411AH would be the same time that the full hostilities were ended in Iraq and the $1 billion a day action was stopped. Cost $1 billion a day. It's 100 hours of war, and it was $1 billion a day to sustain that war. $1 billion a day. That's 500 million pounds a day for 100 hours. The USSR was now a memory and nothing more than a fractured set of 15 new republics. Saudi temporal rulers again commanded their slaves, the Saudi clerical establishment, to back another backdated permission for American troops to mobilize in the peninsula and use it as a launching pad. Because remember, they had to give a backdated statement from the Saudi clerical establishment in order to have the French Foreign Legion come into Masjid al-Haram and the American Secret Service and such to come in and kill Juhayman al-Utaybi. They had to have another one now. This time we needed to backdate a statement that it's halal and fine for them to use this country as a launching operation to go after Saddam because we don't have the strength to resist Saddam. And so they allowed it. So you've got this backdated so-called fatwa. It's only 1 page long. No evidences, no hadith, no Qur'an, just saying it's fine for them to come in. Now, deaths during this period that I mentioned. Raymond Ray Ray Washington and Juhayman al-Utaybi and almost 100 co-conspirators in the sacred masjid complex at the turn of the century in 1400 were killed. All right, so Raymond Ray Ray Washington was killed by a sawed-off shotgun. This caused the war between the East Coast Crips, the Hoover Criminal Gang, Rolling 60s, and later drew in the H-race. This is why the west coast of the United States looks like Beirut. Juhayman al-Utaybi and 100 co-conspirators were also executed in that same year. Josip Broz Tito, the former ruler of Yugoslavia, died in 1401AH. Now, the final decades. 1413AH witnessed the LA uprising on the back of the vicious beating of Rodney King and his acquittal by an all-white jury. So, a man is beaten for 53 minutes. Gets recorded. The person that recorded never thought to call the police on the police that were beating him. Just recording. It goes to court. They see the full footage. They acquit them. They acquit the police. It's left people thinking, scratching their head, how did he get acquitted? They clearly beat this man. They're in the neighborhood of Florence and Normandy. They go to try to rough up a member of the H-Ray gangsters. He fights back. It creates a heated situation. And the LA uprising, which is called the LA riots, that occurs. 54,000 people were arrested over 4 days. It's like 20,000 people a day being arrested. Hundreds were killed. The two paramilitary gangs of the Crips and Bloods unified, defeated the police force, and drove it out of that neighborhood. National Guard came and they were defeated. Special forces came, they were defeated. Finally, the military came and was able to secure the area.